History, far from being a simple chronicle of grand battles and political maneuvers, is a tapestry woven with astonishingly peculiar threads. Among these are the stories of monarchs and emperors whose reigns were defined not merely by their political achievements or failures, but by their startling personal eccentricities. These rulers, wielding absolute power, often demonstrated in profound and terrifying ways how unchecked authority can amplify one's strangest impulses, blurring the very line between effective leadership and outright madness. This exploration delves into some of history's most shocking examples, revealing the bizarre reality of life under the most peculiar monarchies. This journey promises to be both fascinating and thought-provoking, offering insights that illuminate human nature and the unpredictable currents of the past. Caligula, Rome's horse consul and the tyrant's contempt. Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, famously known as Caligula, reigned as Roman emperor for a mere 3 years, 10 months, and 8 days, dying at the young age of 29. His brief tenure was marked by extreme cruelty and the public humiliation of the Roman elite, earning him the moniker of a mad emperor. He subjected senators to torture and even execution, stripped many of Rome's most prominent families of their ancient and noble distinctions, and frequently denounced the entire Senate publicly. He even unearthed copies of previously destroyed incriminating documents, using them to accuse senators of past despicable acts. Perhaps his most infamous act, and one that has echoed through history, was his alleged intention to appoint his beloved horse, Incitatus, as a consul. This was not a practical administrative decision, but a highly symbolic and deeply humiliating gesture aimed at mocking and demeaning the very institutions of the Roman Republic and its Senate. It served to declare the emperor's absolute rule and render traditional authority meaningless. This act, more than any military conquest, demonstrated his profound contempt for the established order. Such actions were not simply random acts of madness, but rather a deliberate and extreme defiance of existing power structures, a stark display of his absolute and unchallenged authority. The complete lack of restraint inherent in absolute power seemed to fuel Caligula's increasingly bizarre and cruel behaviors. This suggests that unchecked power does more than merely reveal existing eccentricities. It can actively corrupt and distort a ruler's moral compass and perception of reality, plunging them into an abyss of tyranny and self-destruction. His impulsive nature extended to military affairs, as well. On a whim, he once conceived the idea of conquering Germania, assembling legions and levying taxes on an unprecedented scale, only to abandon the campaign before any actual war took place. His inglorious end came with assassination, his body hastily cremated and buried, only to be exhumed later for re-cremation and reburial. The elevation of Incitatus to a position of political power, even if only threatened, was a profound act of political theater. By making a mockery of the institutions that historically constrained imperial power, Caligula fundamentally questioned the value and legitimacy of the Senate's role. This was a psychological assault on his opponents, forcing them to confront the reality that their traditional authority was now utterly subservient to his irrational will. It reveals a sophisticated, albeit twisted, understanding of power dynamics and public perception, where symbolic acts can be more potent than military conquests. This amplification of impulses created a dangerous feedback loop. The more power Caligula wielded, the more extreme his impulses became, leading to increasingly tyrannical acts. These acts, in turn, alienated both the Roman elite and the populace, creating a growing number of enemies. The absence of any checks or balances meant there was nothing to halt this escalation. This situation illustrates that absolute power does not just expose existing flaws, it can create a pathology that ultimately consumes the ruler. His assassination was not merely an external event, it was the inevitable consequence of a system designed to amplify destructive tendencies, without any internal or external corrective mechanisms. Elagabalus, the cross-dressing priest-emperor and cultural clash. Elagabalus ascended to the Roman throne in 218 at the remarkably young age of 13 or 14. He was described as beautiful but possessing a licentious and unrighteous character. His reign was characterized by a radical departure from Roman traditions, as he fanatically promoted the foreign sun god Elagabalus, elevating him above traditional Roman deities. He conducted sacrificial rituals with barbarian music and attire, which deeply offended Roman sensibilities. His personal life was equally scandalous. He openly engaged in intimate relationships with male favorites, and even married a male slave, Hierocles, referring to him as husband. He also married the Vestal Virgin Aquilia Severa, making her his empress. Such absurd behavior eventually led his grandmother, Julia Maisa, to attempt to replace him with his more popular cousin, Alexander Severus. Elagabalus was initially forced to adopt Alexander as his son and heir, but later, out of jealousy, tried to depose him, ultimately being compelled by public and military pressure to restore Alexander's status. Elagabalus' fervent worship of a foreign sun god, and his attempts to forcibly impose its cult, including barbaric rituals and attire, were far more than mere personal eccentricities. These actions directly attacked deeply rooted Roman religious, cultural, and political identities. This top-down imposition of foreign customs alienated traditional Roman elites and the populace, causing widespread resentment that ultimately led to his downfall. This demonstrates the critical role of cultural and religious conservatism in ancient societies, showing that rulers, who attempt to fundamentally alter established traditions, especially those perceived as foreign or sacrilegious, can lead to profound instability and violent backlash, highlighting the limitations of even imperial power when it conflicts with deeply entrenched beliefs. His cross-dressing, public intimacy with male partners, and marriage to a male slave were highly transgressive behaviors in Roman society, which placed great value on traditional gender roles and sexual conduct. While historical accounts often demonize him as depraved, these actions can also be seen as a radical, albeit self-destructive, challenge to prevailing norms from the highest position of power. His un-Roman behavior became a powerful narrative weapon used by his opponents to delegitimize his rule. In a society deeply rooted in tradition and specific gender and sexual norms, Elagabalus' radical personal and religious choices were not just eccentricities, they were perceived as an existential threat to Roman identity itself. His opponents expertly framed these behaviors as depravity and un-Roman, transforming personal conduct into a political liability. This illustrates how a ruler's perceived deviation from societal norms, particularly those tied to cultural identity, can be exploited by political rivals to erode legitimacy and rally opposition. Even with absolute power, a ruler cannot fundamentally alter deeply ingrained cultural and religious identities without severe backlash. Unlike political or military reforms, which might face resistance, cultural and religious changes touch the very core of a society's values and self-perception. Elagabalus' attempt to force a cultural revolution from the top, especially one perceived as alien and sacrilegious, demonstrates the limits of even imperial authority. It reveals that societal stability often rests on a delicate balance of shared beliefs, and a ruler who disregards this does so at their peril, regardless of their power. Yeonsangun, Joseon's banished tyrant and the gag order. Yeonsangun of the Joseon dynasty was the son of the deposed Queen Yeon, who was banished and then given poison medicine to die due to extreme jealousy. Although he was raised by another queen, his rule was marked by severe tyranny. He was infamous for his excessive favoritism towards the Gisaeng, female entertainers, Jang Nok-su, even converting Sunkyunkwan, the national highest educational institution, and Wangaksa, a Buddhist temple, into brothels to accommodate numerous official Gisaengs. In 1504, he implemented a notable autocratic act. He ordered the prohibition of the use of Hangul, the Korean alphabet. This drastic measure was a direct response to someone anonymously insulting him using Hangul. His reign of terror was finally overthrown in 1506 by a coup, known as Jungjong Banjeong. He was exiled to Gangwa Island, where he died 2 months later at the age of 29. As a deposed tyrant, he was not granted a temple name, posthumous title, or tomb name. Yeonsangun's mother was deposed and given poison medicine to die when he was only 3 years old. While not explicitly stated as the cause, his later extreme cruelty, paranoia, and hedonism can be viewed as a deep-seated psychological response to this early trauma. These behaviors might have been a desperate, albeit destructive, attempt to establish absolute control in a world where he had experienced profound loss and instability. This reveals a complex psychological dimension to historical tyranny, suggesting that unresolved personal trauma can manifest as oppressive and irrational public policies, demonstrating how a ruler's inner world can profoundly influence the fate of an entire nation. His prohibition of Hangul, particularly triggered by anonymous criticism written in this vernacular script, reveals the ruler's deep understanding of language as a tool for mass expression and dissent. By suppressing Hangul, a script accessible to common people, he aimed to stifle any form of public criticism or collective organization. Conversely, the use of Hangul for anonymous criticism highlights its role as an emerging tool of resistance against an oppressive regime. This illustrates the profound connection between language, literacy, and political control. It demonstrates how authoritarian regimes attempt to control information and communication channels, and how even seemingly neutral tools like an alphabet can become symbols of freedom and means for the populace to express discontent, leading to a fascinating historical struggle over the very medium of expression. A ruler who governs through fear and suppresses dissent creates an environment where genuine feedback is impossible. This isolates the ruler, feeding their paranoia, as every anonymous criticism becomes a perceived threat. The ban on Hangul, while an attempt to control, actually signifies his deep insecurity and fear of the populace. This escalating cycle of paranoia and oppression ultimately undermines the ruler's own stability, leading to their violent removal. It is a classic example of how tyranny, in its attempt to secure power absolutely, paradoxically sows the seeds of its own destruction. Ming Buzong, Zhu Houzhao, China's Playboy Emperor, and the Leopard House. Ming Buzong, Zhu Houzhao, reigned for 16 years but lived only to the age of 31. He was known as the Playboy Emperor, and left behind three enduring mysteries: his birth, his obsession with being General Zhu Shu instead of emperor, and his death from indulgence. During his rule, he favored 8 eunuchs, known as the 8 Tigers, with whom he indulged in continuous revelry. This led to political darkness, widespread corruption, and the purging of loyal and upright officials, ultimately sparking rebellions. His most notorious indulgence was the construction of the Leopard House, Baofeng, in West Park, a complex, multi-story palace with secret chambers, designed purely for pleasure. Here, Zhu Houzhao gathered numerous beauties, musicians, monks, Taoists, and sorcerers, indulging in pleasure for weeks or even months at a time, often without returning to the Forbidden City. More absurdly, he even moved border garrisons to the Leopard House's training grounds for military drills, calling them his Outer Four Armies, effectively turning military exercises into personal entertainment. He eventually died in the Leopard House in 1521, a year after falling into water during a southern tour. Ming Buzong's obsession with playing General Zhu Shu and his retreat to the Leopard House suggest a deep aversion to the realities of imperial rule. This was not merely laziness, but potentially a psychological coping mechanism to escape the immense pressure, the stifling red tape, and the profound loneliness that came with his position. By creating an alternative persona and reality, he avoided responsibilities he found unbearable. This provides a psychological dimension to historical leadership, illustrating how the immense demands of the highest office, coupled with personal inclinations, can lead to extreme forms of escapism and a fundamental disconnect between the ruler and the state, with severe political consequences. The Leopard House was not merely a place of indulgence, it was a physical manifestation of the emperor's profound disengagement from his responsibilities. By physically and psychologically retreating, Ming Buzong created a void at the heart of the empire. This void was immediately filled by opportunistic factions, such as the 8 Tigers, demonstrating a critical principle of power: it abhors a vacuum. His personal escapism directly translated into systemic corruption and instability, highlighting how a ruler's inaction can be as destructive as active tyranny. The Leopard House thus becomes a powerful symbol for the dangers of imperial detachment and the rapid onset of decay when central authority falters. While often portrayed as mere hedonism, Ming Buzong's behavior can be viewed as a desperate attempt to escape the crushing weight of absolute power. The Dragon Throne was not just a symbol of authority but a cage of immense responsibility, ritual, and isolation. His creation of an alter ego and a separate reality suggests a profound psychological inability or unwillingness to bear this burden. This offers a more nuanced, empathetic perspective on his madness, portraying it less as inherent evil and more as a breakdown under unimaginable pressure. It underscores that even absolute power can be a heavy, lonely crown, leading some rulers to extreme forms of psychological retreat, with devastating consequences for their realms. Rudolf II, the alchemist emperor in the neglected empire. Rudolf II, Holy Roman Emperor from 1576 to 1612, was a complex figure whose legacy is viewed from multiple perspectives. He is often seen as an ineffective ruler who contributed to the 30 Years' War, yet also as a significant patron of Northern Mannerist art and an ardent believer in the occult, including alchemy and mysticism. Some argue that his mystical pursuits inadvertently laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution. He was known for his reclusive and secretive nature, preferring solitude and avoiding travel or involvement in daily state affairs. In 1583, he moved the Habsburg capital from Vienna to Prague, transforming it into a vibrant intellectual and artistic center. His passion for art was legendary. He reportedly would gaze at new artworks for hours. However, this fervent patronage came at the direct expense of his political responsibilities, leading to neglected state affairs, costly wars, and internal rebellions. His disastrous initiation of the Long Turkish War, 1593–1606, against the Ottoman Empire led to a Hungarian uprising, and forced him to cede power to his brother Matthias. Despite his personal tolerance towards Protestantism and Judaism, his indecisiveness in religious matters resulted in political chaos and the threat of civil war. Rudolf II's fervent patronage of art and his deep involvement in alchemy transformed Prague into a vibrant cultural and intellectual hub. However, this came at the direct expense of his political responsibilities, leading to severe political and administrative dysfunction. This highlights the delicate balance between a ruler's personal interests and public duties, suggesting that an excessive focus on private intellectual or artistic pursuits, while potentially ushering in a golden age in certain fields, can simultaneously undermine the stability and governance of an empire, leading to long-term decline or conflict. Rudolf's court was a melting pot where astronomers like Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler coexisted with alchemists and mystics. While typically viewed as distinct, in the 16th century, the lines between alchemy, a rudimentary form of chemistry, and astronomy, often intertwined with astrology, were blurred. Rudolf's patronage of the mystical arts, though rooted in a desire for secret knowledge or immortality, unintentionally provided resources and a platform for empirical research, thereby fostering the nascent scientific revolution. This challenges the simplistic modern dichotomy between science and superstition. It reveals a historical period where empirical observation and mystical inquiry often overlapped, suggesting that the pursuit of esoteric knowledge, even when based on flawed premises, could sometimes advance what we now recognize as scientific disciplines. Rudolf II presents a fascinating paradox, a ruler whose personal passions led to a cultural golden age in his capital, yet simultaneously drove his empire to the brink of collapse. This demonstrates that a monarch's eccentricity is not always purely destructive, it can channel immense resources into specific areas. However, when these personal passions overshadow the fundamental duties of governance, the empire suffers. It underscores the critical importance of a holistic approach to leadership, where cultural enrichment cannot compensate for political neglect. This case serves as a cautionary tale that even a culturally enlightened ruler can be politically disastrous if they fail to balance their personal interests with the demands of statecraft. Ibrahim I, the Ottoman Sultan and the harem's dark secrets. Ibrahim I, the Ottoman Sultan, who ruled from 1640 to 1648, was famously known as Ibrahim the Mad. A courtier of the time vividly described his reign. The Sultan fell into the hands of his confidants and companions in the harem, tutors, mutes, eunuchs, and women, who together messed up everything. He was eventually deposed and killed at the young age of 29. Among the most shocking anecdotes associated with him was his alleged obsession with extremely obese women, leading to Ekirper Sultan, known as the fattest woman in Constantinople, becoming his favorite concubine. Even more horrifying, it is rumored that he once ordered 280, some sources even say 1001, concubines to be tied up, weighted, and drowned in the Bosphorus Strait due to rumors of illicit relationships circulating within the harem. Another story claims he would throw gold coins to fish in the Bosphorus out of extreme boredom. Ibrahim's obsession with obese women, and the more disturbing incident of mass drowning of concubines, based solely on a rumor, reveal how the enclosed and highly controlled environment of the harem became a breeding ground for the ruler's paranoia and cruelty. The women within it were objectified, their lives arbitrarily taken based on the Sultan's whims or insecurities. This highlights the profound oppression and dehumanization inherent in the harem system, where immense power dynamics could lead to horrific abuse, transforming a space meant for pleasure into one filled with terror and arbitrary violence, reflecting the darkest potential of absolute power. The courtiers comment that Ibrahim fell into the hands of his confidants in the harem, who together messed up everything, explicitly links his personal obsessions and mental state to the broader political chaos during his reign. The harem, typically seen as a private domain, becomes a potent symbol of the entire empire under Ibrahim. Its closed, unchecked nature allowed his personal pathologies, paranoia, cruelty, to fester and dictate policy, even leading to mass murder. The fact that his confidence from this private sphere could mess up everything demonstrates how the lack of institutional checks, even within the most intimate royal spaces, could directly translate into national dysfunction. This reveals the extreme vulnerability of an absolute monarchy to the personal mental state and unchecked whims of its ruler, where the private realm can become a destructive force for the entire state. The extreme isolation inherent in absolute power, particularly within the confines of a harem, can exacerbate existing psychological vulnerabilities or even induce new ones. Without external accountability or dissenting voices, a ruler's irrational thoughts can quickly become unchallenged decrees. Ibrahim's alleged actions, like drowning concubines based on a rumor, are not just acts of cruelty but symptoms of a mind unmoored from reality, amplified by the total absence of anyone to question or restrain him. This underscores how isolation, combined with absolute power, can lead to a rapid descent into unchecked paranoia and destructive behavior, ultimately consuming both the ruler and the state. Peter III, Russia's ill-fated Tsar in the rat trial. Peter III, the unfortunate husband of Catherine the Great, ruled for only 6 months before being overthrown in 1762. Catherine the Great's memoirs vividly describe his childlike obsession with toy soldiers and dolls, stating it reached the point of obsession. This detail highlights his perceived immaturity and detachment from the serious responsibilities of a monarch, as portrayed by his wife. The most famous anecdote about Peter recounts his discovery that a rat had bitten off the head of one of his toy soldiers. He reportedly flew into a rage, seized the culprit rat, put it on trial in a military tribunal, found it guilty of murder, and ordered it to be hanged on a miniature gallows he had personally constructed. This bizarre event is the central point of the anecdote, showcasing his extreme and unusual behavior. However, this outlandish event primarily comes from Catherine the Great's memoirs, leading some historians to believe it might have been part of her propaganda campaign to portray him as mentally unfit to rule, thereby legitimizing her coup. This crucial point encourages a critical examination of the historical accuracy of the anecdote and the political motivations behind its telling. It emphasizes that history is often written by the victors, and personal eccentricities can be exaggerated or fabricated for political gain. Despite the potential for propaganda, it is worth noting that animal trials were a documented, albeit peculiar, legal phenomenon in Europe from the 13th to the 18th centuries, where animals could receive legal representation and face sentences of execution or excommunication. The historical existence of animal trials, where animals were afforded legal representation and faced formal charges, reveals a fascinating aspect of pre-modern European legal and moral thought. It indicates a period when the lines between human and animal agency, responsibility, and even personhood were far more blurred than today. Societies grappled with concepts of justice and punishment in ways that seem anthropomorphic and bizarre to modern eyes. This is not just a quirky historical fact, it is a window into a different philosophical understanding of the natural world and how justice was conceived and applied, even to non-human entities. It challenges our assumptions about the evolution of legal systems and societal morality. Peter's childlike obsession and the rat trial are presented as signs of unfitness, but the source is Catherine's memoirs, suggesting a political motive. This raises a compelling question: was he truly mentally unstable, or was his behavior amplified or fabricated to appear so for political gain? This case forces us to consider the fine line between genuine psychological instability and politically motivated portrayal. A ruler's perceived madness can be a powerful tool for those seeking to depose them. Peter's story compels us to ask, how much of what is known about historical figures is objective truth, and how much is a carefully constructed narrative designed to justify a particular outcome? It highlights the challenge of discerning true mental state from political performance or propaganda, especially when the historical record is heavily biased. This serves as a powerful reminder of the subjective nature of historical interpretation and the need for critical analysis of sources. George III, Britain's Mad King and the public spectacle of illness. George III, the British monarch, is widely known for his recurring bouts of mental illness, which progressively worsened, eventually leading to complete blindness and deafness by 1818. His descent into what was then termed madness was a public and often terrifying spectacle, marked by a litany of bizarre and distressing symptoms. He suffered from vivid delusions, believing he had the power to raise people from the dead and send them to the underworld. He frequently engaged in conversations with his imaginary company, including those long since deceased like his daughter Princess Amelia, even describing her funeral to them. His behavior could be wildly erratic, at times joyful, laughing and singing, and at others, enraged, swearing at his doctors and flying into such rages that he had to be physically restrained and carried to bed. Reports describe him babbling endlessly, his conversation disjointed and unable to stay on topic, often speaking until exhausted, with foam running from his mouth. He exhibited a severe lack of personal hygiene, removed his clothes, lost weight, and even made a new noise, in imitation of the howling of a dog. In his darkest moments, he would beg his royal staff to end his life. There were also disturbing accounts of him chasing ladies of the court, assaulting family members, physicians, and royal staff, and appearing disoriented and paranoid. Physically, his illness manifested with severe abdominal pain, cramps, rashes, swollen feet, yellow eyes, and brown urine, symptoms that some modern researchers attribute to porphyria, a rare metabolic disorder. Due to his condition, he became isolated from the world, to the extent that he never learned of significant events such as being declared King of Hanover or the death of his wife in 1818. Interestingly, he was the target of assassination attempts by mentally unstable individuals on 3 occasions. His lenient response to these attempts, showing clemency towards his attackers, reportedly boosted his public support. Following a brief recovery, his illness was bizarrely attributed to the Catholic question, reflecting the religious and political tensions of the time. A peculiar consequence of his illness was the recall of the half-crown coin issued in 1816, known as Bullhead George, because the engraver could not sculpt the king from life during his illness, resulting in a poor likeness that caused public dissatisfaction. George's mental decline was not a private matter but a public spectacle, significantly impacting national governance and public opinion. His forgiveness of assassins paradoxically increased his popularity, and the political scapegoating of his illness by attributing it to the Catholic question illustrated how royal health can be interpreted and manipulated through political and social lenses, serving as a tool for public relations or blame. It vividly demonstrates the unscientific and often superstitious understanding of mental health in the 18th and early 19th centuries. Mental illness was frequently viewed through moral, religious, or political frameworks rather than as a biological or psychological condition. The lack of understanding led to ineffective treatments and social stigma. This provides a historical reference point for the development of medical science, particularly psychiatry. Despite the profound challenges posed by his illness, George's personal life held a remarkable contrast. Although Queen Charlotte was described as not ravishingly beautiful and had received well enough educated, but very simple education, George remained steadfastly loyal to her throughout his life, never having an extramarital affair. This stood in stark contrast to his 2 Hanoverian predecessors and his 2 succeeding sons, George IV and William IV, who were known for their numerous mistresses. George and Charlotte enjoyed a truly happy and devoted marriage, producing 15 children. Queen Charlotte herself once stated that her marriage to the king was happy, and she never felt a moment of sorrow since their wedding. The stories of these monarchs, though separated by centuries and cultures, offer profound and often terrifying demonstrations of how absolute power amplifies personal eccentricities, blurring the line between leadership and madness. Across these diverse reigns, common threads emerge: the immense psychological toll of wielding ultimate authority, the dangerous power vacuums created by a ruler's disengagement, the weaponization of personal identity and behavior in political discourse, the inherent limits of imperial authority when confronted with deeply entrenched societal norms, and the profound societal impact of a ruler's personal state. These narratives, therefore, serve as universal lessons about human nature and the inherent dangers of unchecked authority. Histories, forgotten corners, peculiar footnotes, and incredible anecdotes are far more than mere trivia. They provide unique perspectives on humanity, societal quirks, and the unpredictable currents of the past. These accounts remind us that history is often stranger, more intriguing, and frequently more chilling than fiction. They stand as cautionary tales, urging consideration of the profound responsibility that accompanies power and the critical importance of checks and balances. Such mechanisms are vital not only for the stability and health of the state, but also for the very sanity of those who wield ultimate power. The enduring relevance of these mad monarchs lies in their capacity to illuminate the complex interplay between leadership, human psychology, and the delicate balance of power in any era. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey through history, make sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We release new episodes every week, packed with strange, fascinating, and sometimes unbelievable stories from the past. This is Dead Curious, where history gets weird, and we like it that way.